Life can throw many unexpected and unfortunate things our way, but how we react and the emotions we have may signify a need for professional help. And though there is an increased awareness of mental health issues these days, there are also still many questions. Joining me now to talk about some of these questions is one of the presenters of a series of seminars on is it depression, anxiety, or ADHD, do you need a therapist, life coach, or a vacation, is Amy Gokey with Lakeview Center. Amy, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, there have been a lot of things in this area recently, whether it's economic or oil spill, weather, whatever. But then, you know, life just, there's always those things that people have to deal with that aren't very pleasant. So why is it important for people to understand mental health issues and when to take that vacation or when to see someone like yourself?
Right, and I think there are so many things, like you said, in this area that do happen to us regionally that many people maybe elsewhere wouldn't, like the recent oil spill or, you know, just in general, I think economic stress, family stress, job loss, everything like that does absolutely cause us to maybe suffer depression or anxiety. And I think it's really important for people to look at those things and be able to evaluate and identify what the triggers are for them. Then they can look at it and say, well, is this depression like everybody faces, whether, again, it's a death of a family member or a job loss, or is this clinical depression, which the two are very different. Same with anxiety. I think everybody's had a point in their life where they've been a little anxious. Usually it's short-term, you know, fear, panic symptoms. When those symptoms become longer-term, that's when it's easier to identify, maybe I do need to get some help.
Well, I know there is a greater awareness of mental health issues and that it's really something that many people deal with, but there's still probably some preconceived notions of this is just something that I want to talk about or it's not for me, I'm just struggling. How do y'all deal with those preconceived notions that people may have that might hinder them from getting help?
Yeah, I think there still is a stigma, I think, associated with mental health issues, unfortunately. I think we've come a long way, but I do think there's still a stigma associated with getting help. I think a lot of people try to deal with depression, anxiety on their own, and they do the same thing over and over and get the same result. And I think once you've tried those coping strategies that you've learned on your own, and maybe they're not getting you to the place that you want to be, they're not getting the results that you want, then maybe it is time to ask family members, friends for some feedback, or, you know, give a place like Lakeview a call and say, what are my options here? Because we do have so many options. Sometimes people think I'm going to be hospitalized or I'm going to be, you know, put in an inpatient unit when there's so many other options out there. Just even calling a helpline sometimes is very helpful for people.
So how does somebody know if they're seriously depressed or have anxiety?
Some of the symptoms to look for, like I said earlier, you know, everyone's been depressed or anxious at a point in their life, but some of the symptoms to look for in clinical depression is a real pervasive depressed mood, sadness that's lasting maybe 2 weeks or more, that's really inhibiting your daily functioning. Maybe you're losing loss of pleasure in normal activities. Maybe you're not going out and doing the things that you used to do. You're isolating yourself. You're feeling that sense of hopelessness, worthlessness. When that lasts longer than a few weeks, I think it's time to maybe seek some help.
So what might family members or friends notice? I know you mentioned like isolation, they just don't come around anymore. That would be an obvious one. But what are some other things that maybe a family member or friend could be on the lookout for?
Sure, I think personality changes are some kind of the first things to look for. And I think especially as we get older, there's so many transitions we go through and changes that people go through, and I think change is difficult for everyone. So things that family members can look for are, you know, if someone is usually a very outgoing person, all of a sudden they're not wanting to go anywhere, they're not wanting to communicate with you, or if somebody kind of is the other way, you know, if usually someone is very reserved and all of a sudden you notice them going out all the time, if someone is using substances on more than they usually do. I think some of these things, when people are depressed or anxious, oftentimes they do turn to alcohol or drugs, which then makes the problem worse typically.
Right. Well, who's most vulnerable to this? Is this something that everyone is vulnerable to?
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, mental health issues do not know race, gender, age, we all are vulnerable, and there are certain things that we can do to make ourselves a little bit more resilient, looking at those protective factors. You know, do you have good family support? Do you have spiritual beliefs? Do you have people you can turn to in time of need? But there are some things that you just can't change. You know, environmentally, sometimes you can't change stress.
Right. Well, so if someone comes in and they talk to, you know, we mentioned coach and vacation and therapy, you know, there's some nice words in there too. Tell us a little bit about what someone who reaches out to someone like yourself and the seminar that's coming up, what are y'all going to be talking about?
Well, I think the first thing that we're going to try to explain to people is many people do think that if I'm depressed or anxious, I have to go see a therapist, and that's not true. You know, sometimes you can just meet with a therapist one time, meet with a counselor one time, and have that assessment done, and say, you can get that feedback from someone saying, you know what, here's the problems I see, here's the triggers that I've identified for you. What can you do on your own to help yourself? There are many things people can do to try to heal themselves. Treatment may be needed, you know, depending on the severity of the issue, but there are some other things that maybe someone can teach you, some skills, some coping strategies that you can say, okay, here's the identified problem. What are my options for solutions here?
So really, and you kind of touched on it, but what is really the difference between therapy and life coaching?
Well, therapy is more treatment-based. It's exploring how the problem arised, what are the patterns of your behavior, and maybe a little more in-depth exploration of it, whereas life coaching is more just a consultation, really, talking with someone on a half-hour basis a couple times a week or an hour, maybe once a month, and just, again, very specific treatment. What's the problem? What's the root of the problem? And where do I go from here? It's very solution focused.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about the seminars. I know you're presenting some. The one on the 26th will be one of your colleagues, but tell us a little bit about what you'll be covering in yours.
Well, the title, again, is that depression, anxiety, or ADHD. When do you need a therapist, a life coach, or a vacation, potentially? What we're going to touch upon is really, how do you know what you need? Many people don't, because there are a lot of people that aren't very familiar with mental health issues in general. And again, as we age, this is something that we all go through. So really identifying, how do you know when you're depressed? Is it clinical depression, or is it normal everyday depression? Same with anxiety and then ADHD. And then where do you go for help? How do you know if you do need therapy? Maybe you just need that consultation with someone. And then we talk a lot about our services that we provide through Lakeview Center and where you can go for help.
Great, great. Well, I know that's done in partnership with Golden Care with Baptist and Get Healthy Pensacola. So I appreciate all of y'all partnering.
Absolutely.
And since May is Mental Health Month, we appreciate you addressing these issues. So thank you very much.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
It's been great.